Okay, so by now we have a list of all of our stakeholders, or at least all the ones that we've identified so far. Great. But here's the thing, stakeholders are not all equal. They play different roles and have different responsibilities, and they need to be treated differently. Also, in a project with dozens or even hundreds of stakeholders, we rarely have time to accommodate each one's needs individually, and that's why we need to talk about stakeholder classification. What do we mean by stakeholder classes? Essentially, they're ad hoc groupings of people, or departments, or organizations that have similar needs or behaviors. And some examples could be what I'm putting on the screen. Now, each one of these they're all stakeholders, and we may very well get requirements from each one of them, but we'll likely treat requirements from our customers as more important than those from the project team. Or perhaps not, it depends. Why is it important to classify stakeholders? Well, for one, so you can make sure that representatives of each class are involved in developing the requirements. But also, so you treat the various types of stakeholders as they need to be treated, which is differently. We're going to look at three different models for stakeholder classification. Each one makes sense to use in different scenarios. The first is from Karl Wiegers' Software Requirements, Volume 2. Wiegers' model is a one-dimensional method for classification of users. It specifically deals with users of a software system, but can easily be extended or modified to handle users of other products. This model proposes the bucketing of users into one of four categories. First, favored. The most important users of the system are those that we will pay a great deal of attention to, and we're going to design the system for them. Disfavored. These are the less important users of the system. We won't pay a great deal of attention to them. Ignored, those users who we will, well, ignore. And other, anybody that doesn't fall under one of the other categories. And these are usually special cases. Now, this is a very simple and easy to use method. The biggest benefit is that it focuses our energies and attention on favored users, however we define that class. The biggest question that comes up is, how do we assign users to the categories? And Wiegers has an answer for us, which is essentially, however makes sense. He proposes a number of different dimensions that we can consider, and I'll go through a few of them. First, functionality used. For example, if we are focusing on extending a particular function of a system, we could consider those people who use that functionality today to be our favored users. Another is access privileges. This refers to whatever functionality of the system different types of users have access to. One common example of this is the difference between regular users and administrative users. We could consider administrative users to be more important or less important, depending on the project and our viewpoint. Also, tasks they perform. Think of this one in terms of use cases. If there are less important use cases for a system, we might demote the importance of the actors in those cases. Experience or expertise. This can be experience or expertise in either the system or their job. We might, for example, focus our requirements gathering on highly experienced users and then test out our ideas on less experienced users to see how understandable those functions are. And the last one I'll cover is frequency of use. In other words, treating users differently depending on how often they use the system. Now, keep in mind, these are only a sampling of the ways that we might classify users. There are many more dimensions that you can choose, and there are many different ways of handling each classification. And figuring out which users to favor and which to not favor is definitely a discussion that you should have with your project sponsor and maybe your project manager. Moving on, we have probably the most common model, which is usually called RACI. RACI is a two-dimensional method for classifying stakeholder individuals, not groups. The idea is that you have a grid like this, and it's called a RACI matrix. You have a list of stakeholders going down the left side, and you have a list of functions or tasks going across the top. And in the cells, you place one of four things. You can place an R, which means responsible, and that means that the individual will actually be doing the work. You can place an A, which means that this person is accountable or has primary responsibility for ensuring satisfactory completion of the work. You can place a C, and that means that the individual will be consulted regarding the work. Or you can place an I, meaning that the individual will be informed of the work and its progress. RACI matrices are used in a multitude of ways, from planning who does what on a project to organizational governance. But if you consider the functions, that list of functions across the top, if you consider those to be use cases or big components of a system or process, it can be used effectively in business analysis as well. And that's pretty much it. RACI is used a lot, and it's also very easy to use. There are also a lot of extensions of it, and you can take a look at Wikipedia if you're interested in seeing those. And you can also extend the RACI model to fit your own needs as well. The last model for stakeholder classification that we'll discuss is also the one that we're going to be using in the rest of the course and in our templates. It's usually called the power interest model of stakeholder management. Power interest is also a two-dimensional model, and it's used primarily to prioritize your stakeholders and help you figure out how to communicate with them. Just thinking out loud, you could probably combine it with either the Wiegers or RACI methods, but that's more of an advanced topic and we won't go into that detail here. Okay, anyway, with power interest, we typically draw a 4-quadrant box like this. Okay, and going from bottom to top, we have the power dimension. How much power and influence does the stakeholder have, either in your organization or in your project? And then, going from left to right, we have the interest dimension. How much interest the stakeholder has in your outcome. Different stakeholders have different concerns, of course. Some will be highly interested, and others won't care at all. And that's represented on the left to right continuum there. So we get our list of stakeholders, and we plot them on the chart, and then what? Well, the power interest model also recommends how we handle them. For the high power, high interest stakeholders, we should take special care of them and communicate frequently. If the stakeholders are high power but low interest, we should try to keep them happy but communicate less frequently. For the low power and high interest folks, we should also keep them happy and communicate frequently. And finally, the low power, low interest stakeholders, we should just keep an eye on them and address any inquiries that they have. Power interest is really good for projects or organizations that are highly political, understandably, but they're also good overall. Okay, so that's the lecture on classifying stakeholders. By this point in our process, we have a list of stakeholders, and we've somehow categorized them in a way that we find useful. Now we have to figure out how we're going to extract the requirements from our sources, and we'll talk about methods next.